In this video, I wanted to get a brief review of the Coreluxe flooring. This is a 7mm thick width pad, and I also wanted to give some install tips on concrete, wood subfloor, and then as well as making treads out of them. For making the treads and risers out of the planks, I made a separate video showing how I did it exactly, but basically I just cut them to size, glued them down, and put some brad nails in hidden areas, and then cover them with this aluminum nosing. I didn't use the nosing that came with it because it was very expensive, plus it was vinyl, and I thought it would be chipping within a couple of years. So with an aluminum one, this should last forever, longer than the treads will, and plus there's a little grip area right here, so it's a little safer in my opinion. So as far as applying the planks over bare concrete subfloor, you will need to put down a moisture barrier. They call for a 6 mil thick polyethylene, I think, cover. And I just got this off of Amazon or Home Depot. And it's pretty cheap. It's about $30 for a 6 by 100 foot roll, I think. So 600 square feet. It'll come in a roll like this. And of course, this is folded twice on the inside, so this is only about 30 inches. So what I did is I put it down on the floor and taped it and then rolled it out and then unfolded it, and I would have 6-foot strips. And then in rooms where I had a partial one, I had to cut a small section and would just tape the seams and overlap them by a minimum of 12 inches, and then of course tape all the way around the wall, and then that's all you need to do to have the moisture barrier. Also, for both the wood subfloor and concrete, you'll want to knock off any raises that might be there, like drywall mud or anything from the construction process. So I just use a homemade scraper that I have, and you just want to really run it flat and get off any loose bits that you can. If there are big globs of concrete on it, you'll probably want to grind that down with a diamond wheel just to make sure it doesn't show through the floor. And you'll definitely want to vacuum multiple times after doing any scraping or sanding on the floor and during the entire process, just to make sure that there aren't any raises after you put the floor down. So I'm in the middle of installing it on the upstairs subfloor. This is just plywood subfloor right here. So because there's a tolerance of 1/8 inch per 6 foot of length that it needs to be flat, you'll probably have to run the seams with some thin set or some other stuff called feather edge. It's basically just a very lightweight mortar mix, and you just run it until it's flat, and you can run a straight edge across the joints. But that way, if there's a huge gap, so like right here, this plywood right here and the next was about 1/2 inch difference in height, so that would have been very bad if I tried to run this directly over it. This seam right here would have probably eventually failed between the planks, since this is had such a huge angle to it. So this is a little bit of work, but you definitely want to do it right so you don't have to redo the flooring in a couple of years if it fails. So here's an example. Flattening out the joint right here. And again, on this, I think I used mostly thin set. I needed quite a bit. I needed about 40 pounds out of the 50-pound bag. And this is after using the little 7-pound bag of that feather edge stuff, which didn't go far at all. Basically, did just one joint in here. Luckily, my dad had some thin set left over from another project, and I just used it, and it worked perfectly for this. Applying the thin set or a feather edge material, you just need to mix it with some water in a 5-gallon bucket and just use a large trowel and just smooth it out. And you can run a straight edge 2x4 across the joint, and this will get any high spots off. That way you can be sure that it is completely flat and won't have any raised edges when you put the flooring over it. Making the flooring go underneath the door frame is fairly easy. You just need to get a scrap piece and a saw that you could use to sit on top of it flush, and then just run it into the door frame. This way it'll be at the exact height with no gap basically. Here is a door frame that I've already cut underneath. So you can see there's a gap to allow the flooring to go underneath, and it looks very clean when you look from the top. So for making cuts where part of it will need to slide underneath the door frame or something else, and normally you would flip this around the other way to mark it exactly where it needs to be. But in this case, I have it the correct way. So this end will actually install right there, but I have it butted up against the wall, and I just measure how far past it. In this case, it's about 5 inches. I would come over here, mark where I need it to slide underneath, mark 5 inches from that, and then subtract about how much I want to go underneath the door frame. So if this end ends up 5 inches, this will need to go another about 1.5 inches. So it'll be a dog leg right here. So I'll just mark that out with this, since I know exactly along the width where it needs to dogleg. Now that I have it marked out, I can just cut out, and so you don't forget, I put a squiggly right where it needs to be cut out. So for cutting the Coreluxe, you could use the jigsaw or the circular saw. For these small cuts where I have to do dog legs or odd angles, I like to use the jigsaw because you get way more accurate. So I have it on high speed. I have a slight orbit to it actually on this jigsaw, and I'm using a very coarse blade. This one's called Wood Clean Fast, so it'll make a somewhat clean cut, but cut very quickly. This is all I need. I think this is 6 per inch. Here's the cut. See, it's pretty clean. Just wipe off the extra bits, and this is ready to install. As far as sizing the planks at the starting row, it suggested staggering them, and it said do not do an H pattern, so don't make them a third and a third, and then all the joints would line up diagonally. It says to space them. It suggested cut the first one is full length, second one is a half, and then the third one is a third. That way they're all unevenly spaced, and it makes a tighter floor and less likely to come undone. So this is, for example, this is a 48-inch plank. So you could do 48 for the first one, is a full plank, and the next one do 24, and then the next one do about 18 or something. So once you decide on your spacing, you will need to measure and cut it. In my case, this next one's going to be about 16 inches. So to cut it, I'll measure from the starting point. Don't forget, if you measure from the other side, you measure actually backwards. So I'm going to measure right here, measure out my 16 inches in this case. Right here, I'll put my square there, and this floor is really easy to snap and cut. So just run it once, twice, up, and with your knee elevated like this, makes it easy to just lift up and pull down like that, and it'll snap cleanly. I don't even have to cut the pad on the other side. It snaps and rips perfectly as well with it. And for these small pieces, you can get away and save some time by including it with the next plank as well. So you install it as one piece. That way you don't have to make up a joint. And it's so light it'll lift up anyways when you try to install it. So make sure and inspect all the pieces beforehand. So this one looks like it has some shipping damage on the corner here. So knock off any raises, and you might have to use your utility knife. So what I mean is make up the end joint first. Lift it up and line it up as best as you can. Make sure it's tight. Then you can just install the whole thing. And at the start of each row, I put the spacer in against the wall to make sure I have the right spacing. And I have to jiggle it a little bit, lift up to get the joint to seat correctly, but it will click. And you know, it sits flush like that, and then the joint was made. If it's not completely seated, then the edge will be raised up. And to fix it, you can just get a mallet and just lightly tap along the edges, and it'll knock it, and then all of a sudden go flat like this. To install the full joint, on this specific floor and thickness. So this is the Coreluxe Ultra 7mm thick width pad. I found it best to put the end joint first, like this, slightly offset from the long edge. So again, there's more shipping damage. Looks like this box will just hit at a corner, so it's not going to sit correctly. So I'm going to fix this with the utility knife. So I'm going to try it again. Put the end joint in. And now that it's tight, I'm going to let it sit down. And on the end right here, I'm going to lift it up and put the tongue in the groove like this. I'll lift up. And then it'll click in like that. But it's still raised up since the whole joint isn't made along the long edge. So that's where the rod will come in handy. So make sure and hit it with the soft edge. I'm just going to lightly tap it in. And help to lift up the whole row if you can. And almost in. When you're doing this, what might happen is the joint at the other end might lift up, so I'll just run along the whole length. So you can see this is raised up still, so I'm going to go along the whole length and just lightly tap it until I find a spot that's lifted. And now the thing is sitting pretty flat, so I'm going to do the end piece. The noise kind of changes whenever it clicks in. It'll go from a hollow sounding noise to a more solid sounding noise, and then you know it's seated. And that's doing one full set of rows. So now I'm going to repeat the pattern for the starting plank length. So I went full, half, third. Now I'm going to go full, half, third, and continue the full length of the room. So the instructions for the Coreluxe gives guidance on how to end the planks depending on how far you could go per run. So if I look from here all the way into the other side of the house, this was probably about 35 feet, and it recommended not going that far. And if you did, you would have to have a large expansion gap on each end. So I just broke it up and I made transitions. Even though this isn't required, it made it much easier. Otherwise, I'd have to do a little more planning to be able to run this all the way continuously through here. And as far as cutting them, I ended them right at a underneath the door, so that when the door is closed, you don't see this from either side basically. So I have this right here temporarily, but with the door closed, it looks like this from this side and like this from this side. So it's a little cleaner look. It's kind of goofy if this is just in the direct center, because then on the other side you just see this randomly in the floor. And to attach these, I'm going to drill into the concrete with a small masonry bit, and then put a drywall anchor. It's just a plastic housing, and then the screw goes into it and expands it out into the concrete, and that provides the anchor to keep this to the ground. And of course, when it's screwed down, this is nice and tight to the floor. You could also do the same thing, do much smaller holes and put toothpicks in them, and then nail directly into that hole with the toothpicks. And since the toothpicks are compressible, it forces them between the concrete and the nail, and it's a very tight fit and very secure. So here's a quick demonstration of using the toothpicks. So I just drilled it with a hammer drill. If you're going into the concrete, you have to use a hammer drill. So I just lined this up basically, and then started drilling through, and everything's drilled right now. So all I'm doing is sticking in toothpicks into the drilled holes like this. And I'm sticking it till it can't go anymore. Then I'm just breaking them off. And I'm actually snapping them. After I snap them, I break off the tips and I flip them around so the larger side is in the bottom. This way I could get away with less toothpicks and have more wood at the bottom where the nail is actually smaller. So there'll be more of a compression fit down there. So I'm going to line all these with toothpicks now. So I put the nails through the transition, and I just started them into the holes. You can see here's one right here. Let's see if I can find it. And this is just so you put it in the correct location. I have it going into the toothpicks right there. I did the same thing. This is just to locate them. So once you do one, you won't have to do all of them and try to find the hole in case you're slightly out of misalignment. So now I'm just going to hammer these in. But other than that, that's all there is to installing the transitions into concrete. As far as cutting this is basically just a tedious process. You have to measure and make your cuts as best as you can. See, I kind of screwed up a little bit right there. You can see I cut it a little too short. And that's just the nature of how much time you want to put into it to make it exactly perfect. But since it cuts with the jigsaw, as long as you do it correctly and measure correctly, it should come out right. And here is the vinyl plank after everything is finished. I got the quarter round and laid it. I ended up using 5/8 quarter round, and it was big enough, so I wasn't exactly perfect with my gaps at the wall. So any spots that were too big, I ended up going with the 5/8 versus the 1/2 inch just in case. But it turns out great. It's not super big like the 3/4 looked. It looked goofy. So this is just right in my opinion. You see here, turned out great. I did the planks in line with the door here, so when you come in you can see the lines like that, and it looks really good. Pops. Here's the stairs, of course. Everything looks good here. I show a bedroom just as an example of the sheen. So this is definitely a more of a matte finish. but it's fine. So it hides scratches very well. You can't see anything on here. And with the texture, this should basically look the exact same for many years. So as far as my opinion, the install was very easy. I was able to use a jigsaw and a circular saw for everything, as well as scoring it if I was able to make the cut in between the plank. Of course, if I got close to the end, I had to use a saw because it just was too tough to break. Next time I install this, which should be in a couple of months, I'm probably going to use a laminate cutter, so like a guillotine style, where it just shears it. I'm going to see if that works, because that would definitely be much cleaner. So with the saw, you get all the dust and debris that comes with that every time you cut it. So definitely, I'm definitely going to try out a cutter next time. But all in all, I definitely recommend this product. It's very tolerant to a non-flat surface. So I was able to lay the thin set, but I didn't get it perfect upstairs, but it still conformed to it perfectly. I just made sure that I didn't have a joint right where it was very unlevel, just so to reduce the chance of it opening up. But on this concrete, it's silent. Like, I don't hear any noise other than the echo from my foot on it. I don't hear anything underneath it making noise, which is good. So the pad definitely works. So yeah, that is my review of the Lumber Liquidators Ultra. This is the 7mm thick, and this comes with the thin pad, but even though it's thin, it still works. It eliminates the noise that you would hear if it was bare on bare concrete or subfloor. Thanks for watching.